Hello, Garland Nixon here, and I believe that the window of opportunity for NATO to negotiate its way out of the Ukraine debacle has been slammed shut on their fingers. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. And before we get started, there's a guy on British talk radio who named called The Whale, James the Whale. I don't really know much about him, but he did ask me to come on his show to talk about Gaza. We got into a discussion about the recent polls showing that 70% of Americans are in favor of a ceasefire. And I'm going to give you, it's about 1 minute. So I'm going to show that 1 minute, and then we will get going on NATO's options on the debacle that is taking place in Ukraine. But first, here's a video from Garland Nixon yesterday on The Whale Talk Radio.
No, don't smile.
No,
this is a serious subject. Don't smile.
I'm just correcting you.
No, you're not.
We were talking about protests here, weren't we, you buffoon? We were talking about protests here.
No one is protesting against those wars. I just had to correct you that someone.
But they're not, are they? What universities are protesting against these wars?
There's nobody in Britain protesting against the Ukrainian war. Nobody.
Silence.
Okay, but my point is still stands the same. I believe, number one, that the protesters are in the mainstream. They're not extremists here. Let's not pretend that they're some kind of extremist.
Why do you think that? What are you basing that on?
Numerically speaking, those who oppose the ceasefire,
so I totally disagree with
are the extremists from a numerical perspective.
I totally disagree with you. I totally disagree.
It's inarguable. The numbers argue against what you're saying.
I totally disagree with you.
Well, you can, but 70% is much more than 30% the last time I checked.
But what should they do with the ceasefire then? What happens next in Gaza?
Depends where you check, by the way. I suppose you get your facts from Hamas, a terrorist organization. No.
There you go. There you go. I got on the old whale, and I really, to be honest, I really enjoy arguing with people like that. I had a lot of fun. I think they've watched me around, and I think they thought I was going to be, some easy little pushover. Oh, I went for it with those guys the whole time. That was a blast. I hope they released the whole video. I hope I can find the whole video because I just argued and fussed with them and had a good old time. Okay, so let's go. I wondered what the hell that beeping was. It's I left my phone in the other room because my phone always rings during the videos, and now my watch is beeping. But whatever the case may be, let's talk about NATO's options. So let me start here. One of the things that inspired me to do this video, for those of you who know me, I just come up with an idea and just rattle on, and it's all stream of consciousness stuff. I was watching Alexander McCurry's videos. I love his videos. I never miss one. I think it's as much the presentation as it is the content. Though the content is great and very informative, I love the way Alexander McCurry uses the English language. It's like poetry. It's like music. It's really beautiful to listen to. I really enjoy listening to McCurry. One of the things. Somebody said, Garland, I thought you had flipped your lid. I flipped my lid long ago. So, I just have fun. At any rate, so one of the things that he talked about was, and I read about this last week, but I forgot, Donald Trump's people, apparently somebody leaked to some newspaper Donald Trump's plan for ending the Ukraine conflict. If you remember, he said, I'd end it in 24 hours. And I read it, right? And now, I don't know. It's a alleged leak. It could be one of those things where they're running things up the flagpole to see if anybody salutes, as they say. I don't know what the case was, but whatever. Whatever the case may be, apparently Trump had said things like, McCurse talked about it. I read it. You can find it online. It was, okay, we will, continue to arm Ukraine. We will do basically all the things that Russia said they find completely unacceptable. And there was a trust us in there. So what Russia would have to accept in Donald Trump's plan is that the U.S. continues to arm Ukraine. They don't give Russia what they want. And then Russia has to trust that the U.S. will follow, and the U.S., because NATO is the U.S., that the U.S. will follow up on its word later. Well, that just goes to show where we really are, and that just goes to show how nitwits, numbskulls, and imbeciles we have from top to bottom in the West. Because it kind of reminds me of like a comedy, where someone says, okay, how do we get out of it? And some guy says, I have a plan. He says, okay, what's your plan? All right, okay. First, we invent a time machine. And everybody's like, first we what? First we invent a time machine, right? I remember watching The Blackadder, which I used to really enjoy. And then, in one of the scenes, there was a plan, and the guy goes, first we master the science of alchemy, which is turning regular old lead into solid gold. Right? It's your plan. The plan is we're going to do something that no human being could possibly do. That is, unable, that we haven't been able to do for, since the mankind started, making simple stone tools. But for some reason, we're going to be able to do that now. And that's the most important part of our plan, because if we don't accomplish that, the rest of the plan won't work. If your plan starts with turning lead into gold or creating a time machine, I'm just saying that ain't a plan. I'm suspecting it's going to be a very successful one, right? And if you look at Donald Trump's plan coming in saying, look, first we're going to convince the Russians to do something that the Russians will never do. And then from there, then they'll have to trust the people who they don't trust and nobody in the world trusts. Yeah, plan's probably got a few holes in it. I'm just saying, not saying it won't work, but the likelihood of it working aren't real high, right? Again, here's what it shows: that that plan would even be printed, that there would even be discussion of it, right? Shows that there's no leadership in the West that has the IQ, the geopolitical understanding, the wisdom to, more than anything else, to utilize what would be called strategic empathy, right? In order for me to come up with a plan, right? In order for me to defend a case, if I'm going to defend a case, I have to understand the prosecution, right? Or if I'm going to, right, I've got to understand, I got to get as good an understanding of the prosecution as I can. That's why one of the things that should, more than anything else, for any number of reasons, but one of the things that should get the Assange case thrown out, if it were to come here, would be the fact, not saying that it will, because there's no justice here. It would be that the prosecution, the government, spied on the defense, his defense, which means he can't get a fair trial, which means you got to throw it out, right? If you're sitting around listening, if the prosecution is sitting around listening to the defense, then the defendant can never get a fair trial because they got one up on him. No, you can't do that. The trial has to be thrown out, right? But what the prosecution has to do, or what the defense has to do, is have a strategic, not empathy. In other words, not the kind of empathy that you and I think about, right? Which is, I'm concerned. I look at the pictures of the Palestinians being killed, and I have empathy with human beings, human empathy, an empathy that involves love and emotion and consideration of your fellow man. A strategic empathy may be, let's say, let's say I've got somebody that wants to get me and you, kill us, take us out, or whatever. A strategic empathy may simply be, even though I know we got to kill that person first because he's planning on killing us, I understand his motivations. I understand what he wants, what he doesn't want, what he likes, what he doesn't like, what he cares. I get a deep understanding of my adversary from a strategic perspective. It's an empathy in a way, but it's more of a sociopathic empathy. It's more of a scientific empathy. I'm not learning that so I can necessarily befriend this person who wants to kill me and my people. I'm doing that so I can thwart it. Maybe I might want to kill them. I might want to arrest them. I might want to do something to them. But I have to have a deep understanding of them, so I understand their emotions, their wants, their needs, their trusts, all that, right? In order to get a deal with the Russians, you must exercise a strategic empathy from the West. You got to understand what it is that they want, what they're afraid of, what they're concerned about, what they do and don't want. The easiest way to do that, Ray McGovern, I consider him one of my many mentors in a way, unofficial, but I've learned so much from Ray in talking with him and listening to him. A great friend, a great guy. I refer to him as Brother Ray, and he always calls me Brother Garland. Kind of like we're in the church of knowledge, like Richard Pryor had the church of what's happening now, right? And that is, he says, if you want to know what the Russians think, listen to them. My experience with Russian culture, and I have a lot of experience with it, is if you want to understand what the Russians think, feel, or have strategic empathy, just listen to them. I once went on a TV show with a person who was like a former, it was a woman, and she was a former presidential security advisor, right? And she was a total fruitcake, in my opinion. We were talking about what the Russians would do. And I said, well, trying to understand, hey, I think they'll do this for this reason. Why would they want to do that? That wouldn't work. Some of the things I said were dead wrong, but I was making an attempt to understand what the Russians would or wouldn't do. And when it was her turn, she was hair on fire, crazy. Putin's crazy. It sounded like this, like she was trying to catch her breath. Putin's crazy. You can't listen to anything he says. You can't believe anything he says. Right? And I'm thinking to myself, and you were advising the president? You were on a team advising the president, saying you can't listen to or believe anything your adversary says. In other words, we don't believe in strategic empathy. And instead, we just make up a narrative, and you know how it works, and we go with the narrative that we believe. And we project that narrative onto our enemy. Well, our adversaries, our enemies, this is what they want. This is what they believe. And then we act on that as though it's true. I've known people in my life that have done that. Narcissists, that's why I call at times the US the narcissistic empire. Now I have to call it the psychopathic empire. From narcissists to sociopaths to psychopaths. The psychopath is the violent one, right? The truly violent one. The US is a psychopathic empathy. But one thing narcissists do is they don't try to understand their adversaries. They project what they believe onto their adversaries. One of the ways to you're telling with a narcissist is they use words like this all the time. You want, you like, you don't think, you don't need, you don't care, you. What they won't say, I like, I don't care, I think. To a point where you'll have to argue your position. You don't want me to do that. And if you say, well, I don't really care. Yeah, you do. You really don't want me that. You don't like when I say this. And you'll say, well, I don't care if you say that. Oh, you're lying. You do. In other words, you're actually, they will project onto you what you think, what you believe, what you like. You don't like this. And if you say, well, I don't really care. Oh, you're lying. You don't like it. Okay. You just hate it when I do this. And you'll say, well, I don't really care when you do that. Oh, you're lying. You do hate it. No, I'm telling you, I don't hate it. Yeah, you do. In other words, they're going to project onto you a narrative. You don't like this. It ain't true. Because they don't have a concept of you as an other entity. Because have you ever heard this? Little babies think the whole universe revolves around them. Not really. They don't have a concept of the whole universe. They only have a concept of themselves, what they like, what they don't like, what they want, what they don't want. So they don't really have a concept of a universe. There is no universe. They're outside of them to revolve around them, right? That's the narcissist. The narcissist, it isn't that the narcissist thinks or doesn't think, takes into account what you say. You don't count. They have a narrative. Your job is to fill their narcissistic tendencies. Your job is to do what they want. And they don't take into account what you have to say. And they're going to tell you what you think. They're going to tell you what you want. They're going to tell you what you like. They're going to say everything. To argue with a narcissist is to have them speak for themselves. I think you're a jerk. And you don't like when I say, now they've just spoken for themselves and they've spoken for you too. And then you're supposed to argue, well, that isn't what I think. Yes, it is. I speak for you. I speak for me. I don't have a concept of you. I tell you what to do. I create, and then they wake up one day and the person's left them. And they're like, hey, why'd you leave me? I left you because you talk over me all the time. You don't give me a chance to speak. That's not why you left me. You left me because you just wanted a younger fill in the blank. They won't even listen then. They don't have a concept of you. It's a meanness of the world. That's what we're going on with the psychopathic and sociopathic narcissistic empire. It's not that they don't listen to the Russians. It's that they don't have a concept of the Russians existing. They create a narrative, a concept of who the Russians are, and they project that over into Russia. Who the Russians actually are is irrelevant. Therefore, if I don't have a concept of you, I cannot resolve an issue with you, because I'm not really trying to resolve an issue with you. I'm trying to quell my anxiety. I'm trying to deal with my issues. I'm trying to get what I want. And you just happen to get in the way by not going along with everything I tell you to do all the time. How dare you do that? How selfish of you, right? So when that woman was saying, you can't believe anything, blah, blah, what she's really saying is this. We don't want to be burdened with having to take into account what the Russian side wants, because somehow that may not allow us to project the narrative that we want. We really just want to rule the world, and the Russians are in the way. We just really want to destroy Russia, tear it apart, and steal all this stuff, but we can't say that. So here's the truth. If you're in a relationship with the narcissist just really wants you to shut up and do everything they want. If they're in a bad mood, they want to yell at you. They want to curse at you. They want to say bad things. They're going to be unfair. The narcissist will say to you, you can't yell at me. That's terrible. How dare you yell at me? And the very next day they'll yell at you and you'll say, hey, you said I can't yell at you, but you yelled at me. You know what they'll say? No, I didn't. They don't care. They'll gaslight you then. No, I didn't say that. I don't know what you're talking about. You'll be like, oh, I swear you said it yesterday at 4 p.m. They'll be like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't even here at 4 p.m. I don't even know. They will lie. They will gaslight. They don't care. And that's what we're dealing with this sociopathic, psychopathic empire. They don't care. So now that leads them into a bigger trap. That takes them down the road of a dead end for this reason. That only works as long as you have power over that other person. As long as you have authority and domination over that person, you can project whatever you want onto them. You can treat them like crap. You can beat them around. You can yell at them. You can whatever and still get your way because you can dominate and dominate them, right? As long as they won't push back. Here's the problem we have now. What happens when you're no longer in a position of domination? What happens then? You're in a world of deep and serious trouble, aren't you? What happens? Let's just say the narcissist is some guy and he has a girlfriend or a wife and he mistreats her all the time and she's afraid. He says, well, if you try to leave me, I'll kill you. So she's afraid, totally afraid of him all the time. He yells at her, busts at her. He projects onto her. He gaslights her. He does all this stuff in that relationship and she's frightened of him and she's like, I can't leave. He's a crazy man. I'm afraid he'll kill me. He gets in an accident. Now he's a paraplegic and he's paralyzed and he's really sick and he's in the bed and she's taking care of him. He can't dominate her anymore, can he? And when he yells at her, you better bring me this, she says, shut up. What are you going to do, buddy? Get up out of the bed and make me? She walks over and smacks him. He's just sitting there. Oh, no. He's out of options. He has to negotiate, but he doesn't even know how, right? So here's the thing about it. And I just use that to say what happens when you're in a position if you're dominating someone, like in the 1990s, they could push the Russians around. The Russians weren't strong enough. They could push the Chinese around. The Chinese weren't strong enough. They could push the Iranians around. The Iranians weren't strong enough. They didn't have to negotiate. They could just walk over them, run over them, do anything they wanted. And the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, etc., just had to deal with it and figure out a way to deal with it, right? Well, that like the guy who beats up his little brother all the time and slaps him around and beats up his little brother, and they both turn 16, and he's 6 foot and he weighs 175, and his little brother is 6'5" and he weighs 245, and that little brother that you used to push around now can smack you around like a pillow, right? Well, you got problems now. You've been pushing and bullying this little brother around, and those days are behind you, right? Well, bottom line is, so what we're looking at is this. Trump has the same mindset, and his crew. They can't do something different. They can't use strategic empathy because there's a narrative, and Trump will go outside of some narratives, but there's certain narratives that he can't go outside of because for this reason. to go to part of the dynamics which allowed the U.S. to eschew the tactic, shall we say, the method of diplomacy that requires employing strategic empathy. One of the reasons is because they had so much economic and military power, because the Soviet Union fell apart, so they didn't have to live in a real world. They had such domination militarily and economically over others that they didn't have to really live in the real world. They could create these narratives, and other people had to deal with them. Even though they knew they were false, they didn't have the wherewithal to stand up to them, right? Now that Russia, China, Iran, etc., have gotten powerful enough to stand up to them, and the ruling elite in the US, including Trump, are trapped in a narrative in which they are the hyperpower, we have an incongruence here, right? We have the interior discussion inside the US empire that says we will resolve issues around the world in the context that we are the world's hyperpower. But they ain't the world's hyperpower. So they're trying to fit around a square peg in a round hole, right? If they were the US hyperpower, the world's hyperpower still, they could impose on Russia an ending to the Ukraine conflict that was based on the narrative. If Russia was weak, the US could say, you're losing, and Russia would have to deal with it. Okay, you have to take this, and you got to allow us to keep arming Ukraine, etc., and Russia would just have to deal with it. If we were the world's hyperpower, if that narrative still existed, but we're living as though the narrative existed, as shown by the Trump plan, if that's really what it is, in an environment where it don't. So what does that mean? Because here's basically what it means. If I order you to do something, if I try to impose a narrative on you and you refuse to accept that narrative, here's the question that arises. What are my options? If you are the world's hyperpower, your options are use economic, and then if need be military coercion. Here is the thing that demonstrates that we aren't the world's hyperpower. We have already maximized our economic coercion tactics, and they have not only failed dramatically, they have backfired, and they have demonstrated to the world. Now everybody knows they don't have those options anymore, right? We try to use economic coercion, and the world looked at it and says that their economic coercion, not only is it gone, now we've created a dynamic where the other powers in the world say we must create a new world economic infrastructure where the US can't even begin to think about using economic coercion, where we have to completely negate that. So now, not only are they not working on Russia, China, Iran, etc., are now coming up with a new international economic infrastructure where we can't even do it, where we can't do it at all, right? I don't believe that they really want to crash the dollar for this reason. They do a lot of business worldwide, and to crash the Western economy wouldn't be good for the Russian economy, wouldn't be good for the Chinese economy. So they don't want to crash our economy. I think they would prefer that our economy has a soft landing, and that our economy continues to exist, doesn't collapse, so that it doesn't, weigh them down. But we'll see. There could be no way around it. I think they're going to do the best they can. But when you're dealing with such lunatics and numbskulls, imbeciles, and as we have, it's not going to be easy for them. Let's continue. So the U.S. feels that its options are still one of the hyperpower. So they're trying this. Hey, we've got to negotiate with Russia. Well, first, we're going to have a peace summit in June or July, whatever the hell. So June, they have a peace summit. What if you look at, let's do the timeline. June's a peace summit, so-called peace summit in wherever the hell it is, which the Russians aren't invited, which has been summarily dismissed by the Russians, the Chinese, and pretty much the entire global South. The BRICS people have summarily dismissed it. Really a peace summit without the Russians. How silly is that? And July is going to be the NATO summit. Well, it's clear the so-called peace summit is so that they can come up with something to present at the NATO summit. They're going to come up with the peace summit. They're going to say, this is what we're going to do. We'll go to the NATO summit, that this is what we're going to do. Russians are throwing a monkey wrench in it, but let's get to that. We'll get to that. So they're going to go there in June, and they're going to say, of course, the Zelensky plan, right? Which is the dream, which is the Zelensky plan is effectively, let's come up with a time machine, then we'll figure out how to turn lead into solid gold, and then the Russians will have to acquiesce, right? That's basically what it is. And the Russians, even though they're winning, they gotta agree to lose. Imagine that, right? Even though they're winning, they must agree to lose. They're going to win a war. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if at the end of World War II, Hitler would come out of the bunker, when he was, surrounded, when the Red Army had pretty much taken Berlin, blah, blah, blah. Hitler would come out to the bunker and walked up to, whoever the general or whatever it was that was controlling the Red Army and said, all right, here's your papers. I expect the USSR to surrender. Sign right here. And then like on the aircraft carrier battleship, whatever it was off the coast of Japan, that the Hirohito had walked up, with a paper. All right, Americans, here's your paper of acquiescence to all our demands, and we expect you to give it. No, the winner is never going to act like they lost. That's going to happen. So right now, the Russians are engaged in dramatic actions that clearly indicate a victory. And the numbskulls in NATO are planning a June meeting to discuss the imminent unconditional surrender of the Russians. Again, you can do that, right? You can come up with that plan. You can make that statement. The problem is it has to run into reality, because then they can go to the NATO summit in July and say, we've got a plan our peace plan, where the Russians surrender everything. And let's go ahead and get it over there. Let's fax it over to the Russians so they can get it signed and we can get this thing done, right? That's kind of where we are. Well, there's a couple of problems. Number one, I don't think they got to July. Don't think they had that, right? And I think it's one of the issues they have, which is interesting. The problem that they have at home is the problem that they have in Ukraine, and that is at home. And this is just an aside: the American people are not supporting the ruling elite. One of the things that I talked to the whale and his idiots about was that 70% of Americans are in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza. And now you may say, why are you talking about Gaza? That's something different. Not really. What we're showing is a gulf, right? Not a fracture, a gulf between the foreign policy beliefs and policy of the ruling elite in U.S. and the working class, who simply want the elite ruling class to address the issues of the working class, their day-to-day life, right? Improve their material conditions. And I think to some extent there's a lot of that in Europe also. So an idea that Joe Biden could say, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start a draft, and we're going to draft, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of young men and women, and we're going to gear them up to be for cannon fodder like the Ukrainians, and then we're going to send them to fight the Russians. We're going to send them to fight the Chinese, or we're going to send them to fight on behalf of the Israelis, whatever the case may be. That's not an option for Biden. That's not an option for Congress. The young people would tear this country to shreds if they thought they'd burn this country to the ground before that would happen. You think that you got protests on a college now, ho, 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 millions, and it just wouldn't happen. They just say no. And then what happens? What happens to a ruling elite when they say to the soldiers, think of 1917, turn around in St. Petersburg, turn around and shoot the protesters, kill them all. And the soldiers say, nah, we're on their side. The government falls, right? What happens when they say, all right, everybody line up. It's cannon fodder time. You're going to fight the Russians, the Chinese, blah, blah, blah. And the young people say, we won't do it. And they cannot muster an army to go fulfill their imperial machinations around the world, the government falls apart. They fall apart. Once the government orders the people or the military to do something, and the people of the military say, no, you don't have a government anymore, do you? They're not in charge. And they know, well, I'll put it like this. They know the problems they'll have if they try to muster an army so they could go, for their imperial machinations. We can see that starting to form on the college campuses today. And I see it every day in the street, talking to people. People just want to live their lives. They don't want war. And now you're going to say, we're going to gear you up and send you to fight on Russia's border? It ain't happening. Not going to happen. They're not happy. They're unhappy. So let's continue. So what we have is this. We have, on a daily basis now, we're starting to watch the weight of the Russian army leaning against the Ukrainian lines, and that weight wears you down. People know me. My game I like to play, the sport I like to play was basketball. I grew up playing basketball, from when I was 14 years old, played in high school, played in community college. And then as an adult, I played in all kinds of local leagues. I was in like 3 leagues at a time. Loved basketball. That was my thing, right? And one of the things I've had people say, oh yeah, this running. I said, look, I was a guard. And I'll tell you this, it ain't the running that bothers you. Running doesn't wear you down. When you get in shape, anybody that's a soccer player, right? Here's what you know. Running don't wear you down. Once you get in shape, you can run. I said, now let me tell you what will wear you down. If you get down on the blocks and a big guy leaning on you, somebody leaning on you, a big dude, you can run. Oh man, when you're young and you're in shape, you can just run. Your feet just go. And as long as you need to run, you can run. But if you get down on the blocks and some big bastard, I'm 190 pounds. And when I played 181 to 186 max, 181, right? 5'10", 181. That's kind of where I was playing a lot. Low 180s. And I got some guy 220, 230, 210 leaning. Oh, he gets you down on the blocks and he pushes, right? That's your core now. That's not run this way, that way. Oh, I can do that. But now that's on your core. And that big son of a gun, oh God, you're holding him up. And then he pushes you off the blocks and you go around him and then he pushes you just because he's trying to post you up because he's got size and strength on you, right? And that lean and weight, constant weight, right? If I'm just running, I can run all 4 quarters. 4th quarter, I'm still running, I'm jumping, I'm going for steals. If that guy's leaning against me after about 2 quarters of that, hey, coach, take me out. I got to go to the bench. You're sucking wind. You're drinking the Gatorade water and everything, right? You're trying to get your act together. The weight leaning against you, that engages your core. That engages those huge muscles in your thighs and your back. And next thing you know, everything's tired, right? Right? It's not the running. It's the heavy, constant, nonstop of the weight that wears you down. Why do I say that? Because the Russians didn't punch. The Russians didn't launch offensives here and offensives there. They just leaned on the front line of the Ukrainians nonstop, dropping bombs, throwing artillery, going forward, backing up, shooting, hitting over here, hitting over there, constant pressure on the front line, right? And they just lean their heavy weight because they got this big, heavy army. They lean that heavy artillery and bombs and stuff on them, on and on, because what they knew is this: sooner or later, that weight's going to wear you down. And when it does, you're going to have to go to the bench. You know what I mean? Sooner or later, you're going to the bench, right? So, exactly. Somebody says wrestling, the same thing. I wrestled when I was in junior high school. Yeah, let me tell you something. Same thing. You're wrestling somebody and they grab you. Let me tell you what. 10 minutes of wrestling is 4 quarters. 5 minutes of wrestling is like 4 quarters of basketball, right? You're running around in basketball. Wrestling, there's some guy on top and he's pulling and that weight nonstop. Man, a 3 minute a round in wrestling, again, that weight on you. There's no break. There's no respite. There's no rest. It just wears you down, right? Again, you can see what the Russians did. They exhausted their enemy. We're going to exhaust our enemy. Why? Because it doesn't look like anything's happening. Doesn't look like we're winning. Doesn't look like anything's happening. But at some point, they become exhausted and they can never hold up anymore. What we're seeing now is the result of a 2-year plan to exhaust their enemy, right? And now the Ukrainian lines are exhausted. Now think about exhausted. They're running out of war material. They've exhausted their supplies and their supply lines, right? They're running out of troops. They've exhausted their men. Unfortunately, women too. Children, seniors. That's a sad state of affairs. They've exhausted their personnel resources. They've exhausted their material processes. But something else. And lean on them, you get mentally tired. The country is getting exhausted. The people don't want to fight anymore. They want it over. They've exhausted NATO. NATO's like, hey, can you send us some more stuff? NATO's like, yeah, we're kind of short. We don't really have much to send you. Right? And they've exhausted the will of the European people, exhausted the people in Germany, in England are now like, yeah, for God's sake, man, we're losing our jobs. We're getting deindustrialized. Things are going bad. They leaned on their opponent and they exhausted them in all phases. And now their opponent is exhausted, which materially affects the options of the ruling elite of the West, whose plan all along was the Ukraine project, which was what? Utilize Ukraine to take out Russia so then you can move going to China and everything else, right? They've exhausted the entire project. So now we're in a situation where, as the lines crumble, NATO has to evaluate its options, right? But NATO, the leaders of NATO, the U.S., right, and it's numbskulls that think they're leaders, and you know, the Schultzes and the Macrons, et cetera, that would position themselves as leaders, though they're not really, are not in touch with their options. Now think about this. One of the things that Macron continues to say is this, and that is, now, if the Russians go too far, we'll have to step in. Well, okay, let's go this. Too far. Well, you can certainly, you know, we'll have to act. We'll have to prevent. Okay, so we can understand what they would mean by too far. That would probably likely be geographical. If they move to take Kharkov, if they move to take Odessa, if they move to take Kiev, whatever the case may be, right? If the Russians go further than we think they should go, or we think it's permissible, then we'll have to stop in and we'll have to stop them, right? Well, right now, the Russians captured 12 villages yesterday. Yeah, 12 villages a day. You ain't got but so many villages, okay? How many days do we have before this situation handles itself, right? But again, cementing my point. What are the options that NATO has? So that's where we're getting to. When Macron says if they go too far, which is, again, that's something that you can put in words. That's something that you can understand. You can say, this is the line. If they cross this geographical line, if they take this, whatever, right? But you can actually quantify too far. We'll have to act. We'll have to stop it. We'll have to do that. That's where we come into NATO's options. Because if they go too far, well, you can't take Odessa. And the Russians basically are at a point where they're like, we're ignoring these people. We're taking what we want. If you don't like it, stop us. That's where the Russians are. We're going to do what we want. It's on our border. And what the Russians have determined is this. Look, there are two kinds of borders, and some of you may have heard, I think Dmitry Medvedev talked about this. There's various kinds of borders, right? They're physical borders, right? They're political borders. Physical borders could be a river. That though you have a border here, you got a river, and you got to use that as a physical border to protect yourself, right? There's your political and physical borders that say we've drawn a line, and the world agrees that this is Russia and this isn't. On this side of it, Russia. Okay. There's strategic borders. For instance, the U.S. said all of the Western Hemisphere is our strategic border. Therefore, Nicaragua, Venezuela, none of you guys can have a Russian or Chinese or an Iranian base there. We've determined that's part of our strategic border. Nobody else is allowed to have strategic borders but us, only us. In fact, the Black Sea is part of our strategic border. Think about this. If we're saying to the Russians, you can't go to Odessa, we've now said that Odessa is part of the U.S. strategic border. I'm sorry, that's too far. You can't take that. It's on your border, but it's part of our strategic border because we want to come right up to your line. So now what is the battle for Odessa or Kiev or any other thing that we determine is too far? What really is that? It's a battle for strategic borders. It's the U.S. empire saying we run everything. And we have, see, in taking Ukraine, what do empires do? Empires expand and contract. What we're saying is the U.S. empire has expanded up to the Russian border. When we took Ukraine, we expanded our empire up to the Russian border. What the Russians have said all along is this: we will not allow you to expand your strategic border up to our physical border. Ain't happening. Ukraine will be part of our strategic border, not yours. So when the U.S. said, okay, we're overthrowing the government of Ukraine, the Russians said, you get real close. You get real close to the point where we're going to have to go to knuckle junction. When the U.S. made it clear, now it's ours. We consider it part of our strategic border. The Russian says, okay, well, then we got to figure this out in a way, in a kinetic manner. Since you guys don't want to talk about it, then we are willing to fight for our strategic border. Are you? We're willing to go as far as we have to go. And the Russians have pulled out their nukes. They said, we'll nuke you before we'll let you take. If you're willing to go to nuclear war for Ukraine, which is on our strategic border, that's what you're going to have to do. It's existential for us. It ain't for you. We're going to find out. We're going to find out. The Russians are basically saying, we will do what we have to do to maintain Ukraine as part of our strategic border. The word Ukraine means borderland. And the only question is this: whose strategic border does it fall inside? And the Russians have said, we have become powerful enough militarily, we have become powerful enough economically to protect Ukraine as part of our strategic border. We weren't before, but we are now. Are you powerful enough military to come in and try to take it from us? Because that's what you're going to have to do. You can have Ukraine, but you're going to have to fight for it. And if you take it, you're going to have to fight to keep it. And if you think that you're going to walk away unscathed, we'll nuke your asses before we will let you take it and before we'll let you keep it. What are you going to do? That's really the options that Russia is dictating. View Ukraine as a borderland, and the U.S. says, we're going to keep that. And the empire has expanded to your border, and Russia says we're not going to allow the empire to expand to our border. That's what we're talking about here, if you really think about it. And when I talk about what are NATO's options, how far will NATO go? Well, there's two things. How far will NATO go to maintain Russia as part of the U.S. empire's strategic border? I mean, maintain Ukraine as part of the U.S. empire's strategic border. Certainly, how far will they go? How far will they go is first and foremost dictated by how far they can go, right? If Mike Tyson's standing in my front yard and I walk up and Mike Tyson says, I've decided to claim your front yard, you can't walk up to your door. Part of how I deal with it, can I fight and Mike Tyson move or I'll kick your ass and Mike Tyson says, come on. Well, that's not an option for me. Do I have a gun or a knife? I got a knife. Mike Tyson says, come on and fight. Let's see if you can use that knife to defeat me. If you're not, I'm going to kill you. Do I have a baseball bat? Do I have a bunch of friends that I can call? Okay, I got 25 guys with baseball bats. Mike, you got to get out of the way. It's my yard, not yours. I'm not letting you have it, right? My options are dictated by what I have at my disposal to use to dislodge this person from my front yard so I can get to the door. They have claimed my yard as theirs. They live next door. They've decided that not only is their yard theirs, my yard is theirs too. That's what it is. But the U.S. doesn't even live next door. The U.S. lives like 1,000 miles away, and it's come to Russia's house. Many I'm saying, basically it's from the metaphor of homes, and it's come to Russia's house saying, Russia, I've come to your house, and I decided your front yard is mine. Well, Russia knows this. If you take my front yard, you're taking the house next. If you take my front yard, you're going to then take my side yard. You're going to then claim my backyard. And at some point, you're going to take my house. I got to stop you from my front yard because I'm not giving up my house. I ain't giving any of it up. So now what happens is this. Between now, I think, and the peace meeting, right, in June, what we're seeing is a collapse. What we're seeing is the Russians have leaned on the front yard on the Ukrainian lines, till the Ukrainian lines are falling apart. And at some point, I believe, within the next several weeks, you'll get a really bad collapse. And when you get a bad collapse, I don't think it's just going to be the front line. Scott and I have been talking about it. The collapse will not just be the front lines collapse. You know what I mean? I'll put it like this. When the dam breaks, it isn't just the dam that breaks. The water goes through. There's communities, there's towns and villages in the valley behind the dam. Guess what happens? They all get washed away. Everything goes. The dam breaks. It's holding back the water. But it isn't just holding back the water from the dam. It's protecting everything behind it. As the front lines collapse, to me, I don't see any way that it doesn't bring with it a political collapse, an economic collapse, an emotional collapse in Ukraine, right? When the front lines collapse and the troops start running for their lives and they're all just running in another direction, what are the troops supposed to do? The front lines crumble, they fall back to the secondary lines, they fall back, right? But they don't really have secondary lines and already starting to fall back. So they fall back, the Russians advance, and they try to set up again, but they don't really have very good trenches or things to fall back to, right? So now when they fall back, they're going to get hit hard again. And the Russians are coming downhill at them now. Downhill, smacking them. Meanwhile, what's happening politically, the people who are in politics are going to start asking themselves questions. One of the questions they're going to ask themselves is, what the hell am I going to do when the Russians show up in town? I'm part of this thing, right? What the hell am I going to do? I've been part of the Rada. I've been part of the Ukrainian leadership. And it looks like in a few weeks, the Russians are going to be wandering all around this city, collecting people up to try them for blowing up Russian towns and cities and all kinds of things. And I'm going to be here, and they're going to be knocking up. There's going to be some Russian guy knocking at my door saying, hey there, buddy, we need to have a talk with you. You were involved in this, that, and the other, and lots of Russian civilians died. And oh, by the way, you're going to Donetsk, the Donetsk People's Republic, who is now part of Russia, that you'll be tried there. You'll get a fair trial and a first class hanging, right? Or you may get away with it. We'll send you to Siberian work camp. So, hey, it might not be that bad after all. It gets almost to 90 below zero every now and then, the Siberian work camps, and we'll give you a blanket. So it ain't going to be all that bad, because you're not going to live long there anyway. So as the lines crumble and collapse, the rats all jump off the sinking ships. The oligarchs, the wealthy, they're getting the hell out of the country. The people who know that they will be held accountable and responsible, they're going to be getting the hell out. Look, I've said all along, how does this end? I said, how did Afghanistan end? Ashraf Ghani, he was the president of Afghanistan. And what happened when things fell? He called Joe Biden, and he said to Joe Biden, he said, look, he says, things are going bad, and the Taliban's overrunning our position. And Joe Biden, if you recall this, I've reported on this many times, you can look it up. Joe Biden said, look, even though it's not true, we need you to project the image that things are going well. Just lie. Look, even though the narrative has collapsed, we want to hold on to the narrative as long as we can. And what did Ashraf Ghani do? He got $160 million in American cash. He jumped on a damn plane and he got the hell out of Dodge. That's what the rich and powerful do. And that's what, as the Ukrainian lines collapse, the wealthy, the people who have been involved, the people who've been swindling money, the people who've been involved in all kinds of Nazi trickery, etc., are going to say the Russians are coming downhill. We're getting the hell out of here, and they're all going to run. Who knows? We'll set up a government in exile, but they're getting the hell out. This thing's going to, when it goes down, it's going to fall fast. It's not going to fall slow. When it comes, when the first domino fall, when you see these lines start to collapse and crumble, the problem they're going to have is the recognition that this thing is falling apart will first be felt by those who are vulnerable, right? The oligarchs, the thieves, the crooks, the criminals, right? They get the hell out. Uh-oh, the Russians are winning. What do you want to do? Let's get the hell out of here. They got Mercedes, they got Maseratis, they're driving around the nightclubs, drinking and partying in Kiev, just like it's a 1999, right? But they're going to know this party's coming to an end. Let's take all this money. They're going to be taking their jewelry, their fancy cars. They'll be lined up at the border. There'll be Maseratis lined up at the Ukrainian border to get the hell out. They'll be running. And the problem that the U.S. empire is going to have will be this. They're going to say, well, can we prop up? Wait a minute. There's nothing to prop up. Think about this. When Afghanistan fell, what the U.S. empire did? Did they try to prop it up? There was nothing to prop up. All of the military was running for its lives. The people who had collaborated and worked with the U.S. empire were all coming to the airport saying, "We worked with you guys. Get us the hell out of here. We were collaborators. We're seen as traitors. We could be hung. We could get our heads cut off. Anything terrible can happen." So the U.S. had people dangling, hanging off of C-130s. You saw it. Planes taking off. Some guys holding onto the fuselage of the landing gear. Oh, splap. Because he knew, hey, things ain't gonna work out real well for me here, right? But could the U.S. have saved them? Could it have done? No, the country fell, and that was the Taliban. That wasn't the Red Army. The Red Army ain't Taliban. The Taliban didn't have Su-35s and Su-57s. It didn't have artillery everywhere. It didn't have drones and alligator attack copters and T-90s. No. The Taliban just had a bunch of angry guys with Kalashnikovs and light weaponry, medium weaponry. And they knocked the hell out of the U.S. trained guys, so much so that they got out of there and left their equipment behind them. And that was the Taliban. That wasn't the Red Army. And the Red Army now is coming downhill. You can tell what's happening. They are coming downhill, as we say, as a metaphor in sports here. That means basically when somebody says you're coming downhill, that just means you have momentum, that you are in the attack mode, and your adversary is in a defensive mode. That means coming downhill. And your adversary is somewhat intimidated that not only are you in the attack mode, that you have speed and momentum. That's what the Russians have. And, the Russians are slick because while the NATO is like, yes, we're going to operate. We're going to do a huge operation against the Russians, and we're going to have an offensive. And the Russians are like, when? In March. And the Russians are like, okay, offensive in March. Ready. And whereabouts anyway? And the West is like, well, we're thinking about doing here, here, and here. And the Russians are like, here, here, and here. All right, guys, you got that? We need to set up fortifications here, here, and here. I want you done by the first week of March because these idiots have told us they're doing it the second week of March. That ain't the way the Russians work. When you say to the Russians, when are you going to do it? They say, do what? When are you going to attack? They say, attack where? In Ukraine. The Russians say Ukraine, never heard of it. Sorry, we don't know what you're talking about. I know. The Russians don't know nothing. They haven't seen anything. They don't said nothing. There is no indication what they're going to do next. And even as they are launching an offensive, you say, hey, are you guys launching an offensive? They're like, well, offensive? Nah, we just got some guys hanging around, eating, munching on some borscht or something like that. But I mean, as far as an offensive, no, we don't know what you're talking about. No, they ain't going to tell you what they're doing. But the Ukrainians are feeling it. They're feeling the heat, brother. They're feeling the footsteps. So right now, the Russians are launching offensives, and a lot of the world doesn't even know it. But the Ukrainians know it because the Russians ain't going to tell you because they know how to fight a war. How about we start there? You never tell your enemy what you're going to do. Some guy's attacking you, and the guy's like, what are you going to do? And you're like, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come in and kick you in the chin. Oh, I'm going to stomp on your foot. Well, I'll show it like a groin strike, or if I can get underneath, I want to get inside close. So that way, no, you don't want your adversary to know what you're going to do you? Absolutely not. But the West, these lunatics, idiots, morons, and numbskulls, because it's all a PR operation, they're doing it for their people. They're doing it. We got to maintain support from the American people. So let's tell them, hey, American people, next we're going to attack the Russians. Boy, are they going to get it. And we're going to hit them here, 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 and here. Boy, they're going to fall out. And the Russians just taking notes. Thanks, idiots. That's not how we do that. You know what the Russians do? They deliver for the quality of life of the Russian people, and that way they don't have to bullcrap them. The Russian living standard is improving. The Russian economy is strengthening, so they're delivering for the Russian people. So rather than have to feed them a line of bullcrap to keep them engaged and to keep them supporting the government, they actually deliver for them. They tell them why they're fighting. They get buy-in from them. This is why we're fighting. This is what we got to do. But they did something even more powerful, and that was this. They waited until they had market insistence, right? They didn't attack when the go into Ukraine when the Russian people were saying, "Do you think we should go?" Probably a good idea. Maybe we should go. They waited until there was a chorus of the Russian people screaming, "Why aren't we going? What's taking so long? Why aren't we attacking Ukraine? We got to stop these people." And once they got market insistence, as they say in business, once they got the people behind them screaming, "Why don't you do this?" They said, "Okay, well, now we're ready to do it. Now we're ready." So they had built-in buy-in because the people were screaming for them to do it. Whereas in the West, the people want you to deal with their material day-to-day needs. So you got to try to drag them along for a policy that doesn't benefit them anyway, that they don't really care about or want. You got to convince them to want it. You got to convince them to care about it with lives. Like they said, you got to have Nato trolls on Twitter, where you're like, well, we're sure are losing the war, but we're winning the information war on Twitter. That's all we're ever going to win is the information war on Twitter. So now what we've got is this. The Russians are eliminating NATO's options on the battlefield. They're now creating a dynamic where, number one, NATO does not have the material options because they've sent it all in, or most of their equipment into Russia, and Russia's bashed it to pieces. They don't have the political will of the people because the stupidity of their leadership to cut Ukraine them off from Russian cheap Russian energy, and to create a dynamic wherein the material needs of the regular everyday working people has been worsening during this conflict. The people there don't have the political will for a war. They got the political will to improve their lives. So they're saying, really, to the people in charge, can you improve our lives? And the people in charge are saying, we got to stop the Russians, number one. So they don't have the political will. They don't have, if they wanted to fight, they don't have the war material that they need. And they're spread too thin. We got to go after China. Oh, we got to go after Iran. We got to go after the Middle East. They're spread thin. The fronts, if you think about it, it's a three-front war. The U.S.'s neocons are at war with the world, trying to maintain domination that they don't have. But right now, they got a minimum of a three-front war. They got a war in China where they're trying to do economic, diplomatic, and war, and they're trying to put missiles and things in front of China to threaten the Chinese. They got a war in the Middle East. Literally, they have a kinetic war going on in the Middle East. They got a front there. Now they're flying military missions off the coast and around Venezuela to harass us. So they got another front in South America. And of course, the hottest of all hot fronts, might I add another thing, they have a diplomatic front at home, because the people at home are enraged over what's happening in Gaza. So they're at war with the college students. They're at war with 70% of America, 70% of America, 83% of Democrats, 56% of Republicans, 65% of independents want an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. So there's a front. There is a front at home, and there's a kinetic front at home because they're fighting, literally fighting the students. There is a what's the other term I want to use? Legislative front at home, because the U.S. is trying to pass all kinds of laws and bills, be it censorship, be it ban TikTok, be it ban the protesters and send them to Gaza, whatever the case may be. So they're trying to pass legislation to address the pushback that they're getting from their people at home over Gaza. They're spread fronts all over the place. And the Russians are saying, well, you guys, you got to fight here, 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 and here, including at home. Our people at home support us. We got people on the battlefield who are well trained and well equipped. We're going to roll over the Ukrainians. And what is bound to happen, is that at some point, I always say this, at some point, the Ukrainians are going to turn on the West and the US and empire and its vassals and say, we ain't pissed at the Russians. We're pissed at you for doing this to us. The billionaires, they're going to get the hell out of Ukraine. They're all out of here. They're all gone. They're all going to run from the West. Help, save us. The Russians are coming to get us. And they're going to leave the poor and the working poor to be screwed in Ukraine. And the U.S. is going to try to, okay, we got a plan, the U.S. empire, when they're forced to negotiate with the Russians. All right, we got a plan, Russians. You give us, here's the Zelensky plan. And the Russians, so here's the way it happens. It goes down. The Russians know this. I know it. You know it. The Russians know it, right? The Russians simply understand something. That they understood all along. They've understood this for a while. There ain't one way to solve this. The Thunderdome, right? 2 men enter, 1 man leave. They know this. Ukraine is going to be either part of the Russian strategic border, the Russian orbit, or the U.S. empire strategic border, the U.S. orbit. There's the only way to resolve it. There ain't no way to talk this out. There ain't no way to work this out. Nonviolence only works when your adversary has a conscience. Diplomacy only works when your adversary can be trusted. And they know their adversary has no conscience. Psychopaths have no conscience. They don't have one. Sociopaths, that's the nature of sociopaths and psychopaths. They don't have a conscience. Don't care. They don't have concern for the results of their actions. They're in the now. They're very zen. They're in the now, right? So ultimately, here's what the Russians know: we gotta win this thing with our fists. We're gonna win it with our fists. And Macron, well, if they go to Odessa, then if they go too far, take Odessa, then we'll have to act. Really, what you gonna do, Macron? Because the Russians are there. The Russians are. If we want to take Odessa, we'll take Odessa. If I were the Russians, I'd take it. If I were the Russians, just saying, if I were the Russian leadership, I'd take everything I wanted to take now. I'd say, look, we ain't going down this road again. Not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now. We're not standing around waiting for you to rearm this or that. We're going to take everything that we want. This is a war. You've already shown us that you're ready to go to war with us. You fired missiles at us. You killed our civilians. You did everything. War is war. Your decision. I'm taking what I want. This is my border. And I've decided I'm taking what I want. If I were the leadership of the Russians, this is what I would say. This is my border. And now the decision is clear. Is Ukraine going to be part of my strategic border or part of yours? And it damn sure ain't going to be part of yours. Ain't happening. It's on my border. Do you think I'm letting the U.S. empire come up to my border? It's not going to happen. I will fight as long as I have to fight. Any way I have to fight. You can send in the French, the Germans, the British. You can send in anybody you want to. They come up to my border. I'm kicking their ass. They're going to have to fight. All of you are going to have to come in. Every last one of you, if you think you get in Ukraine. So I have the resolve to do that. Do you? Let's find out. And I think that's where the Russians are. I think the Russians' position is this. We have the resolve to take Ukraine, whatever we want Ukraine. And that's what we're going to do. The issue is not the battle. The issue is, do you have the physical, do you have the resolve to do it? Do you have the resolve to come in Ukraine and fight me on my border, to expand to my border? Because that's what you're going to have to do. Do you have the political will of your people to do it? Do you have the war material and the military might to do it? Because you're going to need all of that if you come into my border and you're going to expand your strategic border up to the Black Sea. Come on, let's go. I'm saying, if I'm the Russians, and I know no second round here, ain't going to be no second round. There's going to be one round. I've been down this road. We tried to do the Minsk agreement. We tried to do Minsk 2. We tried to do the Istanbul Concords. We tried everything we could, and it didn't work. That was your decision. My decision is now we're going to dance. And I'm going to draw out, not based on this war, how the war goes, what I want to take. That's not that. It's not based on how much I can or what I negotiate. I'm going to say, based on the interest of the strategic border of Russia, if I'm the Russian leadership, I'm going to draw what I think we need for a strategic border, and I'm going to take it, and you got to stop me. And I don't think you can. Let's find out. And so Macron's, his threats or whatever, they're going to have to be willing to act on. The problem they're going to have, though, again, is that Ukraine's going to fall apart, and the Ukraine project is going to dissolve. So you're not going to have a Ukraine. You know, I've said Ukraine is like a black glove, right? When the criminal goes to the crime scene, he puts gloves on so that his fingerprints won't be left at the scene. It's plausible deniability. It wasn't me that did it. I have on this glove, and it was somebody else. You don't have no in my fingerprints at the crime scene. That's all Ukraine is. Ukraine, the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian government is nothing but a black glove that the U.S. empire puts on its hands so it doesn't leave its fingerprints at the crime scene. So it can plausibly say we're not trying to advance our strategic border up to the Russian border. We're trying to help Ukraine to be a free and open. It's a lie. They know it. We know it. The Russians know it. The only people that don't know it is the schmucks that buy the propaganda. So the Russians are like, we know the truth. You're trying to expand your strategic border up to the Black Sea. You know it. Let's find out. You guys can talk with who you want to. You can do all the propaganda narratives you want to. When it comes down to it, I know what you're trying to do. You know what you're trying to do. Can you do it? Let's go. But when the Ukrainian military, Ukrainian political class, when they all dissolve away, right? There ain't going to be a glove anymore. See, that's the problem the U.S. empire has. What happens when the Ukrainian military falls and runs for their damn lives? What happens when the Ukrainian oligarchs start getting on planes, getting the hell out, and people are hanging off the fuselage of C-130s taking off out of freaking Kiev? When you get to that point, you can no longer say we are helping to save Ukraine because Ukraine has dissolved. It now becomes the Russians saying, okay, Ukraine's out of the way. Your glove is off. There is no way to keep your fingerprints off the scene. Not for me, not for your people at home. Now, if you want to fight, now that the Ukraine military is done, you have to send your military in here, and you got to come in and fight me for Ukraine without being able to use the lie that you're defending Ukraine. Ukraine's finished. Are you willing to come in and fight? And do you have the military and wherewithal and manpower to do that, even if you have the motivation to do that? Do you have the political will at home? Ukraine has fallen. What are we going to do? We're going to send our soldiers in and take it from Russia. Because even then, what would you have to do? You would have to take Ukraine from Russia. Then you would have to occupy Ukraine against a constant Russian onslaught. Even if the West took Ukraine, well, physically, we're able to do it, which they can't. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the West was able to go in and take Ukraine. Right? Again, somebody said USA won't do that. I'm just doing this for the sake of argument as an intellectual exercise. Let's just say the US was able to take Ukraine. Boom, it's ours. We drove the Russians back to the other side. The Russians would use tactical nukes. The Russians would use everything they got. They'd bomb them. Day and night. They'd fight. They would fight like hell. So now the US would be on the Russian border, and NATO locked in a life and death struggle against the Russians for all eternity to see who keeps Ukraine. The political will in the West, the political will in the U.S. ain't there, number one. Number two, they couldn't supply the military things, the tanks, the shells, and all that they need. At the same time, they're dealing with what's expanding to be a regional war in the Middle East. And of course, you've got the Indo-Pacific, where the Chinese would likely say, well, look at Taiwan here. Looks like you're kind of busy over there. You've been hassling and harassing us about Taiwan for quite a while, haven't you? Hey, look at that. Taiwan's just sitting there, nice and quiet. I think we'll take it. I think we will do our unifications, right? They've admired themselves into a fight that they can't win. And as I said, I'll leave by saying this. Here's the way to view this, and that is seeing Ukraine as a border of Russia. The U.S. wanted to expand its strategic border up to the Russian border, which is to take Ukraine. And Russian says our strategic border, Ukraine will be part of it. And so there you have it. You got the U.S. here, you got Russia here, you got Ukraine there, and U.S. is saying, I'm going to come right up to your border, and Russia saying, like hell. Let's see who has the resolve. The U.S. Just doesn't have the military options, doesn't have the economic options, doesn't have the political will. It ain't happening. All right. Well, thanks a lot, you all. Certainly appreciate it. A couple of things we're going to look. There was some super chats, and we're going to look at the super chats and answer all the super chat questions. We're going to answer our super chat. We'll get some great questions from super chat. So let's start with the Sparkster. Great work, Garland. Thank you, Sparkster. Let's go to, again, build a better world with bricks, the old Sparkster. Here we got make Ukraine Russia again. Yeah, I hear you, Sparks. Sparkster says, don't even leave a patch called Ukraine, lest it remain a NATO playground, carpetbagger, money laundry, and becomes a BlackRock property. You're exactly. They ain't playing with this. They're saying this is going to be our part of our strategic border, and it will be as we please. The winner, see, the U.S. is like, well, we'll negotiate a deal. The winner will dictate the deal. That's what will happen. And the winner's going to be Russia. The Russians, they will dictate a deal. Donald Trump thinks he can give the Russians a deal. You got no leverage. The war is being lost, and it ain't going to be around much longer for a deal. By the time they get to Zelensky's, I can't wait for this peace negotiation plan to see how that goes. I don't think they can even have it. But this peace meeting they're having with Ukraine, under the circumstances, can you imagine a month from now what Ukraine's going to look like? The collapse is coming, my friends. Watch for the flood of Ukrainian Nazis entering Canada, the U.S., and the EU. Yeah, they got plenty of company waiting for them. Elaine Morgan, Garland, your everyday analogies are really helpful and illuminating. Thank you. Your energy is fabulous. But thank you. Thank you. Sparkster says, Newsom Kushner 24. That Sparky's funny. Anything else? I don't see the trolls today. Sparkster says, at Crush Satan pointed out Argentina in the chat. Argentina may also be a popular destination for Ukrainian Nazis too. Milei may roll out the red carpet. No, there's no question he would. Milei is total puppet. Total puppet. All right, let's look at Rockfin, see what people got to say there. Hip Car says, was not Estonia, Lithuania, East Germany, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan all part of Russia, and now Ukraine, Georgia, Crimea, and Azerbaijan are under attack? How much would USA let another country take if Russia started dissolving them, taking states? We used nukes on Japan for no reason and nuked Iraq with DU. Fallujah is worse than Hiroshima. Yeah. So the U.S. look. Russia knows the U.S.'s games that'll be playing on its border, but the loss of the coming loss of Ukraine will be devastating worldwide for the U.S. empire. It will be devastating for the U.S. empire. It will be devastating in Europe. It's happening though. There ain't no way around it. No way around it. I want to thank everybody. Actually, Hempcar also says, if USA claimed their nukes are for defense, then Russia would be right to use them after being invaded in East Europe, the stand nations, and elsewhere. USA nuked Japan for no reason, nuked Iraq with DU too. Okay. Raphael says, you've been killing it lately. I saw you with the guy from Portugal. Outstanding. Your show is good. Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate that. Raphael. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Let me end by saying this. If you can, certainly appreciate it. Buy me a coffee. PayPal. Buy me a coffee is great because you can do buy Garland a coffee for $5. How many? However many you want. And of course, you can do just like Patreon with Buy Me a Coffee, which is to say, if you want to do a monthly Buy Me a Coffee thing, you can do that. So that's great. You got Patreon. Follow me on Telegram, PayPal. What's the other thing? Cash App, all that stuff's there if you can afford it. If you can't, look, no problem. Just save this on all of your share this on all of your social media platforms. Follow me at Rockfin, ROKFIN, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Don't forget, Rockfin's very important because it's a platform that does not in any way, shape, or form interfere with what we're saying. Truly a free speech platform. It doesn't do advertisements the way a lot of people ask me, well, how do they survive if Rockfin doesn't do advertisements? The way Rockfin survives is through subscribers. So if you can afford it, become a subscriber on my Rockfin channel. I think it's $14.99 a month. If you can afford it, highly appreciated. If you can't, doesn't matter. Also, follow me on Rumble. I got all of these followers on YouTube, so please, I need more Rumble followers. Everybody here, go follow me on Rumble. And share this on all your social media platforms. Certainly appreciate it. Peace. I'm out.